All right, so we're going to convene the Iowa City Council work session for Monday, April the 2nd. The first topic is to discuss design parameters for American Legion Road, Foster Road, and McAllister Road projects. And I know Jason's going to make a presentation to us. Before you speak, Jason, I want to indicate what I understand our purpose to be tonight. It's, first of all, to listen carefully to what the staff is presenting to us so that we know how they're thinking, and then to provide guidance about what we want done. And I don't know what that guidance is going to be. We'll find out. It depends on our discussion. So, Jason.
Yes, thank you. Jason Havel, City Engineer, here to talk a little bit about roadway design parameters and specifically as they relate to the upcoming projects, the American Legion Road, Foster Road, and McAllister Boulevard projects. So kicking things off here, just kind of an overview of what we're going to go through. I'm going to talk a little bit about general project considerations. So those will be the items that really apply to all of the projects, some of the kind of the background information, and then I'll kind of get into specific information for each of the projects. You should have in front of you a copy of the presentation here. It's an exact copy. The only thing is obviously it's not in color. So the one thing I would note is for the bicycle master plan. That's really the only place where color will matter, but I'll go through and kind of talk about those items specifically. But everything else I think will come out a little clearer maybe in your copy versus what's on the screen. But if you have any questions, obviously feel free to ask at any time. And so I guess the other thing is, as I go through this, sort of what I was envisioning is I'll go through the general project considerations, and then I don't know if you want to stop there and kind of have some discussion, or if you want me to go through all of the projects and do it at the end. I'll leave that up to you, and you can just let me know how you want to go.
We'll see. Yeah.
Okay. So starting things off here, obviously the first point I want to make is all these projects will include utility improvements, so that'll be public. There also will be some where we'll look at doing whether it's a joint trench or relocating of some private utilities. That'll be part of all these projects. Obviously, I'm guessing that's not really the topic for tonight, so I made that assumption. I wanted to note that, but I'm not really going to go into any detail there. So obviously, if you have any questions, let me know, but I'm going to kind of glaze over that portion of it. So really starting things off with the Complete Streets policy. I've put a couple of quotes here from our Complete Streets policy, just kind of that help guide what we're looking to do on all of our projects, really. The first one being, obviously, that all current and projected users of the public right-of-way are intended to conveniently reach their destinations via public rights-of-way, regardless of their chosen mode of transportation. And then the second one being, provide for the needs of all users and abilities in all planning, design, construction, reconstruction, retrofit, operations, and maintenance activities and projects within the public right-of-way. I promise that'll be the last part that I read. But really, that last point is what I'm trying to get to is, what we're trying to do is provide transportation options for people, ways that they can get where they're going and have the option to use whatever mode of transportation they want to in order to make that trip. So obviously a big portion of what we do for any project that we do within the right-of-way, looking at design considerations, the first thing I want to mention here is that these will be arterial streets. So these are going to be the streets that handle not only people going home that live on these streets, but also people that commute and use these as part of their trip, but not necessarily their destination. So they're intended to handle regional and local traffic. We also anticipate that with these projects, there will be the likelihood of either heavy vehicles or transit. All three of these corridors really are areas where transit is either desired currently or where we foresee that there may be some benefits to having transit on these routes. In addition, these are areas where these new streets are anticipated to address traffic concerns. A couple of examples here. Foster Road would obviously potentially help with Linder Road, Kimball Road, and Brown Street, where those are locations where we do from time to time receive complaints. In addition, McAllister Boulevard would also help with issues on Langenberg, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. We've received numerous and kind of ongoing complaints for that stretch. As part of these projects, obviously, we've considered the bicycle master plan. So we looked at what's recommended there, and I believe that we've incorporated that into the designs for these roadways. Looking at lane widths, I think this is obviously probably one of the main topics probably to be discussed tonight. NACDOT does discuss 10-foot lanes. I know that's been brought up on occasion. But it also does, as you can see here, note that for designated truck or transit routes, one travel lane of 11 feet may be used in each direction. So really what that's saying is they understand too that when it comes to buses or heavy vehicles, that those vehicles do take up more room than your standard passenger car. And so if you're having these roadways, they do allow for that 11-foot lane, at least one in each direction. So here, talking a little bit more about lane widths, I've just provided some information here about vehicle sizes, and this comes out of or from NACDOT.org, so their website. You can see here I have a couple of different, or three different diagrams that kind of include some measurements. There you see a standard 40-foot bus with the width of the vehicle being 8.5 feet, including the mirrors that bumps up to 10.5 feet. And then they also include a buffer zone around the bus, and that is basically 6 inches on each side. So that will then increase that to 11.5 feet, kind of that full buffer area for a bus. They also include basically recommended minimums for roadway design. And you can see here, if you're looking at a route that includes transit for two-way traffic, they recommend 22 to 24 feet as the recommended width. Now, I will note that this is curb to curb, so this would be assuming only two travel lanes and doesn't incorporate bike lanes. But they do talk then about half streets, and so that would be basically one travel lane and one bike lane in a single direction, so basically half of a street. They look at having a 15-foot minimum and then a 17-foot desired minimum. And just for example, here we have Foster Road proposed at 18 feet and American Legion Road proposed at 17 feet. So they're right in that range.
Sorry, Jason, I'm not quite tracking what you're describing here.
Okay.
So with regard to any one of these street segments, how many lanes are being proposed in each direction?
So I believe all of them will be one lane in each direction. So there'll be two-lane roadways with bicycle facilities.
All right, so when you talk about half street, what are you telling us?
So basically that would be, so if you have an east-west road, if you're looking at just say westbound, it would include one travel lane and one bike facility lane. And so that's what this shows here with the pink bus and the green bicycle guy. It's basically just saying, so for half of the street, one way, this is what they would recommend. Mm-hmm. So and then you would basically flip it and it would be half the street for the other way. So that kind of, you would take that times 2 to get your full roadway width. Does that make sense?
Okay, that's helpful.
Okay. So here I just wanted to show a few examples of some recent city projects, basically just kind of getting to the point of the discussion of narrowing up lanes and moving towards that direction to show that it is something we've been working on for a period of time now. Going back to Lower Muscatine Road, which was completed in 2014, that included 15-foot lanes in the 2-lane section, so that'd be kind of the northern part of the project. And then once we got into the 3-lane section, that bumped down to 13-foot lanes. Sycamore Street, which was completed in 2015, had 11-foot travel lanes. First Avenue grade separation, which was completed in 2017, had 11.5 to 12-foot lanes, depending on kind of where you were at in the project. Washington Street, which was completed in 2017, had 11.5-foot lanes. And then Dubuque Street, which is obviously ongoing, had 11 to 12-foot travel lanes. So again, this is just kind of for comparison, again, showing that there is this trend in that lane reduction, or that lane width reduction. Yeah.
In going back to Jim's question a minute ago, so that 11 to 12-foot does include the bike lane then, or?
Does not. So that would be just vehicle travel lanes.
That does not include the bike lane?
Correct.
Okay.
So moving on with design considerations, another topic is design speed. So this is what you basically, some of the design parameters that you use when designing the road. A lot of times this comes into play for vertical and horizontal curves as part of the roadway design. We've proposed 35 mile an hour, 35 mile per hour design speed, and that's consistent with what we've done on other arterials in fringe areas. One I did want to note, obviously, is McAllister, which is McAllister pretty much between Mormon Trek and Old Highway 218, so it'd be a section a little bit further to the west, actually has a speed limit of 45 miles an hour. So the 35 mile an hour would be consistent with what we've done in other areas. And kind of finishing out the sort of the general project considerations, again, we've kind of gone through some of the design considerations that have gone into this project, and we believe that we've met sort of the design guides that are out there, and kind of working to piece this all together and try and put together basically the best puzzle we can for all users. There's been obviously some stakeholder input, so we've had public meetings on American Legion Road. Once we get into the design for the McAllister Boulevard, we anticipate public meetings there. And then there's also obviously ongoing discussions from not only public groups, but your discussions as well, and trying to incorporate that all into the projects. But at the end of the day, I mean, these are our recommendations. The reason we're here is for your input. So if you have feelings that or input that you want to get into this project and you want to see things change, that's why we're here, basically to present our recommendations and then get your feedback. And then finally here, I do see this kind of as a first step as we move towards SUDAS for design. And as a reminder, we'll be doing that kind of in 2 steps. So we'll be doing our specification adoption first, and then down the road, we'll be looking at our design manual. And I see this kind of feeding into that, which probably will be here in the next few months.
So Jason, before you go on, and not to leap too far ahead, I just want to signal something. In the past, we've had extensive discussions with regard to the area around Alexander Elementary, which means McAllister Boulevard. And in terms of using the form-based code to help create a place down there that differs from conventional subdivisions. And it's been very clear that the design of McAllister is a crucial part of the development of that kind of neighborhood. Likewise, we've had extensive conversations about how whatever form-based code comes out of that project could be applied to other emerging neighborhoods, such as the south side of American Legion Road at a minimum. So I worry, just to put it out there, I worry about 35 mile an hour design speed, because that means 42 miles an hour. So I'm worried about that. So, tag that.
Yep. Well, and one thing I would note is when we look at 35 mile per hour, the intent is that the design would be the posted speed. So we don't have that built in, but there's, I guess, that point in response. But
Okay.
So to Jim's point, in a sense, what's the reason why we don't just do 25 across the board? I'm not on that. I can feel kind of where we're headed, and I'm not that type of driver, but I'll figure that out myself. But ultimately, why don't we just do 25 across the board? I feel like we consistently have this conversation. What's the impetus to why you would, not you personally, but why staff would come back with 35 when, ultimately we want to slow traffic way down?
And I think it's part of a spectrum. And so I think what our thought process is again, these are arterials. These are not local streets where, it's all residential right on the street. So I think the intent is that it has the ability to move traffic, have heavier vehicles, again, kind of give that space for those vehicles. These tend to be more on the commuting side. So again, there'll be local and regional traffic. If the desire is to go to 25 for all, I think that would be a possibility. But I think it's really looking at it as that spectrum of where, obviously you have local streets make sense, obviously, for very low speed. Interstate makes sense for very high speeds. It's just trying to figure out what that balance is of moving people through the corridor while also having that placemaking ability.
I'll come back to it.
I'll just add a quick note, too. I think there's a difference between, like, moving people through the corridor and creating a speedway, so to speak, of trying to get across town quickly, which I think that's what some folks are going to use all three of these roads for. And I think there is a concern, and we heard recently when we were looking at Langenberg Avenue, the study showed that like 85% went the speed, but 15% did not. So if 15% are going over 35, as was quoted, say 42, that's serious. That's a serious safety concern, I think.
So I just want to note that I'm going to jump into American Legion Road, so if you'd like to stop now and have some discussion, or if you want me to move forward, I'm fine either way, but I
It's
just wanted to bring
probably
that
good
up.
to move ahead. I just wanted to tag a topic,
Sure.
and I'm sure there'll be more conversation.
So the American Legion Road Improvements Project will look to have a complete reconstruction of American Legion Road from Scott Boulevard to Taft Avenue. That'll be a conversion from what is now a rural cross-section to an urban cross-section. The biggest change there is really going from roadway shoulders and ditches to curb and gutter and a storm sewer system. With that, obviously, there'll be sidewalk installed as part of the project as well. A couple of unique pieces with this project are the single-lane roundabout that is proposed at Scott Boulevard and American Legion Road, as well as the pedestrian underpass, which would be just west of Barrington Road towards the east end of the project. So for American Legion Road, what we're looking at, sort of the end points here, there at the Scott Boulevard, American Legion Road intersection, just an example of the existing pavement that's out there. Muscatine Avenue is currently a 31-foot back-to-back pavement section, as well as Scott Boulevard. So those are both 31 feet in width, which is the point we're tying into on the west end of the project. And then on the east end, would be out basically to the county. American Legion Road is 22-foot pavement width. That obviously is still a rural cross-section, so that would be essentially two 11-foot lanes. And then Taft Avenue is approximately 24-foot pavement width, and that's the piece to the north. To the south, it becomes gravel and is a little harder to measure, but that would be the chip seal section basically to the north.
So just to make sure I heard correctly, so the existing Scott Boulevard, well, the existing width of Scott Boulevard and of Lower Muscatine at that intersection they're both 31 feet total width, is that
Yep.
right? And what's being proposed or recommended or whatever by the staff is 36 feet, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
But the 31 feet is just 2 lanes of
Correct.
traffic.
Yes. So that's just pavement width. That's not a comparison of travel lane width.
When you say 31 feet, do you mean to the face of curb or the
That's
back?
back to back.
Okay, so it's from
30
face of
foot.
curb, it would be 30 feet.
Correct. Yeah, approximately 6 inches for curb on each side.
Jason, do we know what the speeds are on American Legion right now?
I don't know. Since we changed it, I don't know if they've been measured. Okay, so I think that's accurate. So here is a cross-section from the functional plans. And what this shows is basically a breakdown of not only the pavement cross-section, but also the lane widths here. So again, it's a 34-foot back-to-back. And so with that would be two 11-foot lanes, as well as two 5.5-foot bike lanes. It also includes an 8-foot sidewalk on the north side, and then a 5-foot sidewalk on the south side, and that would be a 100-foot proposed right-of-way. One thing I just want to note, I think we're consistent in here, but when talking about bike lanes too, we just need to be careful on what exactly we're measuring. Sometimes the curb's included, sometimes it's not. So you'll see on here it's a 6-foot measurement, but that includes the curb. So I've included 5.5-foot bike lanes, which is just the actual travel area that could be used.
So just to be clear, so what you're presenting us with right now differs from what appears in the memo?
I think it's consistent with the memo. I think we just had talked about 36, and 36 was actually for Foster Road. So I think
just for Foster.
this is consistent with what's in the memo.
Oh, right. Correct, I'm sorry, correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have an idea of what traffic volume we might see on American Legion?
I don't. So wanted to kind of just add some additional information for the pedestrian underpass that's planned. So what this would be, little west of the Barrington Road intersection. This would be essentially a box culvert that's installed as part of the project, so it would be a tunnel under American Legion Road. And the intent here is that it would support safe routes to school, also enhances the regional trail network, and basically where these benefits come from is obviously it allows a grade separated crossing of American Legion Road. And one of the reasons this is a good candidate for this location is just given the topography and the profile of the road. You're not having to do something like on Riverside Drive where you're having to bore through a railroad embankment. Here, it's simply excavating and placing the culvert in place. So the costs are significantly cheaper. I think it's in the neighborhood of about $100,000 for the box culvert to be installed in this location. So again, just kind of some details since this is really unique to these projects. So a little bit about the bicycle master plan. So for this location, and unfortunately this doesn't show up very well in the printouts, but you'll see a blue line and a green line here along American Legion Road, and what that calls for is bike lanes and side paths. So again, we would have the on-street bicycle facilities. We would also have the wide sidewalk on the north side and the standard sidewalk on the south side. One thing I do want to note too here is you can kind of see on the far right or far right side here, there's a line that kind of cuts perpendicular through American Legion Road, and that's a future trail. So again, that leads back to that pedestrian underpass, and having that regional trail also coming through this area and providing that benefit. Another thing I want to note here is with where we're at with the American Legion Road project. So we've completed functional design, and that was completed a couple years ago. And what that had done is basically took a look at, okay, laying out this project, is it something that's feasible? Is it something that we can fit here? Is it something that we can really move forward with? We've completed that. That was completed before the bicycle master plan. So right now we have on-street bicycle facilities on the American Legion Road project, but we haven't really looked at, are there better options there? You know, one thing we've considered is, do we want to look at doing a buffered bike lane or something like that? That's something we can do as we move into final design. We're just not there yet. We're actually working on the contract to get a consultant on board to complete that final design. So I just wanted to make that note that, you know, again, the bicycle master plan actually came after the functional design was complete.
So to follow up on that, if in the scenario the council says to you, we want this to be designed at 25 miles an hour, what does that imply for the functional design, contract negotiations, et cetera?
I think, you know, as far as functional design, I don't think that we would probably change that. We would just move forward with basically final design, but include that in the contract to say it would change it from a 35 mile an hour to 25 mile an hour. I would anticipate there'll be some changes. I don't anticipate that it'll be a huge burden. I think overall, the plan view of the project, or, you know, how it curves and that kind of stuff will likely be very similar. So I would see the design being pretty similar to what it would be for the 35 mile an hour.
So we're not, thank you. So we're not too far along in the event that the council says we want it to be 25 miles an hour. I'm not saying that's going to be the case.
Yep, and like I said, I mean, we're just now working to finalize that contract, so that we could include that.
Thanks.
Very briefly, what impact would a buffer bike lane have on the total lane width? When we need to lower the roads that are designed for the traffic only, like, for example, that have to go to 11 to 10, or what impact would that have?
I think there'd be different ways we could do that.
Okay.
You know, I think we would have to look at, is this total pavement width still what we want, or would we want to widen it a little bit? I mean, you certainly could widen it to add buffers. If you were looking at reduction in lane width as well, we could look at that at the same time. So I think for the most part, we could, really all the options would still be on the table. So here's just kind of an overview of the project costs and schedule for the American Legion Road project. You can see here the total project is estimated at about $9 million, with construction being about $6.9 million of that. As a reminder, there are federal aid dollars on here, so the DOT will be involved with basically as we will go through the design process, which is part of the federal aid process. As far as schedule goes, the design development here is shown as April of this year through November of this year. That, again, we're just kind of at the front end of that, just starting that final design. And then likely next year would be a lot, or most of basically the property acquisition and the private utility relocation. So those would likely be kind of the project ahead of the project slated for next year. And then looking at a bid letting late 2019, construction likely in 2020.
So let me ask you a question about the cost, projected cost. My dad was a civil engineer, but I never quite got it. So if we urged upon the staff a total roadway width that is, I don't know, 2 feet narrower, or whatever would be appropriate for some specified design speed, what effect would that have on the estimated construction cost?
If you're reducing pavement width by 2 feet, it's likely going to reduce the overall project. It's probably not going to be all that significant. I mean, you do have a fairly long stretch here, so I think there will be some cost savings. But you need to keep in mind that pavement is only part of the project, so all the underground utilities, all that stuff is still going to be stuff you're going to have to do. But there would be some pavement, some cost savings, I guess, from the reduced pavement. Anything else on this project?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I don't know, you don't have the breakdown cost, but I really would like to know how much it costs the wide sidewalk that belong on the north side of the street.
What's the total cost of that?
Yeah,
Or-
that part, because my understanding, you're going to do that first, but for the south side, you will wait. Is that true, or?
And I think the reasoning there is the north side would serve really all the users that we anticipate using the facility now. The existing development, all that stuff is on the north side today. And so I think the thought is that the south side sidewalk would be done as development occurs in that area and as there becomes a need for that sidewalk.
I really have a concern because I know the student from Modern Manor and Sunrise Village, they will use that, the sidewalk that's not going to be done for the south side in the future. And this is really, I know that they are outside the city limit, but still they will use that sidewalk to go to school.
And they would have the ability to use the sidewalk on the north side.
Yeah, but that means they're going to cut the street twice.
True, but
Yes, and
one of them
here-
would be the pedestrian underpass. So but yeah, you're correct. And
Yeah, that's true. Maybe it will be less dangerous, but still there is some kind of danger for those kids. My recommendation really to go ahead and do both sides. I don't know how much it's going to cost, but anyway, you're going to do it in the future. Why not just go ahead and do it now so those kids from the, Modern Manor and the Sunrise Village, they can use the sidewalk that in their side and just go rather than cross the street here and go over there across the street twice.
it's included in the functional design, and the grading would be complete, so it wouldn't be very much to.
Yeah,
There would
yeah.
be some additional cost, but it wouldn't be that much work to add it.
I don't know what the councils think, but I think if there is a way we can just go ahead and do both sides, it would be great.
One of the other things, though, Mazza, here is when developers develop, they either share in or pay the full cost of those sidewalks. So there's, by waiting, plus you're going to be tearing it up at different stages as they're going in to develop.
But we need that. We're concerning about the safety. We don't have to wait for the developer, but because the developer will pay later have a cost, we just now sacrifice those. No, I think we need to do that just for the safety of those children.
On that point, Maz, my concern, well, I understand the point you're making, but if we only build the wide sidewalk on the north, then kids from Modern Manor would have to walk up to American Legion Road and cross at the roundabout. That worries me because we're talking, at the moment anyhow, 35-mile-an-hour speed limit. People will slow down coming to roundabouts, but still the purpose is to kind of move right on through. So we'd have to, if we do a roundabout and we do the 35-mile-an-hour thing, we'd have to think really seriously about how to ensure the safety of the kids who would have to cross the street.
I agree with that, because that's just anticipating that possible future development on that south side. But that could be a number of years, and in the meantime, these children are having to walk there and cross the street and then cross again, even though you're talking about the underpass, which we'll talk about later. But I agree with Mazza here.
Jason, on the intersection at Barrington,
Yeah.
so there still will be crosswalks there, correct? And what is the width on the two sides?
I don't know offhand. I would assume it would probably be a 6-foot crosswalk.
Oh, I meant the width of the roadway.
Oh, the
there.
width of the roadway? You're probably looking at maybe 55, maybe a little more than that. I don't know what all the lane widths would be here. I would assume that it'd be in that neighborhood, because you're probably looking at 4 travel lanes and then the bike lanes as well. And that would be on the west side. Obviously, on the east side, it looks like there may be one less travel lane, which would reduce that.
Uh-huh.
That's it for this project.
Well, I'd like to,
Go, stay.
I'd like to tag another possibility with regard to the place where kids would cross from Barrington to get to the school. So the possibility is, instead of having a pedestrian underpass, to have a street designed at 25 miles an hour and have a user-activated stop signal with a well-marked pedestrian crosswalk and maybe a safety refuge, concrete safety refuge for anybody trying to cross the street. I don't know if staff's thought about that as a possibility. I don't know if it's viable, but
Is the thought a full traffic signal, or are you thinking just the pedestrian only?
pedestrian walks up, hits a button, light comes, a red light, or red yellow light flashes, and then a red light comes on, and somebody crosses the street.
I'd have to check. I don't know if they really have what they have for options at intersections. I think typically those are full signals. I know they do have some mid-block, the flashing beacons, that kind of stuff that are options. We certainly could look at that.
But tag it.
Sure.
And I would second the refuge island, because the one by Hy-Vee on First Avenue, that seems to be very effective, and the motorists seem to respect that and slow down or stop if there are pedestrians there. So I would like to see perhaps a cost for that.
And one challenge here is with that left turn lane, you're going to have to widen the pavement even further just to get it in. Where at First Avenue, there's that center turn lane that's not being used, so you have that existing space that you can use as a refuge. Not that it's not possible, but just something to keep in mind.
Regarding that pedestrian underpass, is there going to be any lighting in there? I mean, that just looks creepy. Right?
That would be part of it, yeah. Certainly that's part of the design.
No bicycling for you under there, Kingsley.
Kids walking. It's creepy.
How far is the underpass from Barrington?
I don't know offhand. I'd probably estimate 300 feet, give or take.
Okay.
And how does it tie into the, it looks like it's not clear to me how it relates to the school site, because is that still the school site there? Where
Yeah,
it
so the
crosses?
south, you would basically have, and it's, I don't know if you can see it up here, but basically the part that looks like it's going directly south would go to the school. The part that goes to the west then ties into the existing sidewalk. So obviously, to make it accessible and all of that, you need a fair amount of distance to get from below the street up to street grade to tie back into the sidewalk.
I just want to say this again for the record. I prefer to have really the other side, and I would love to know the number of how much it's going to cost if you did both sides, a sidewalk for the south side. And also because the children, even though you're going to have that, like they can press and everything, but this is during a morning time where everybody running to school. Those kids are walking to ride. Their parents, most likely, they don't have car. And, you know, a lot of kids will be there just pressing, and some of them maybe they are not going to use it and just try to cross the street. Why, if we can make them safe, why not?
So I believe that's included in the estimate, so that would be included with the project. It was
Okay.
just provided as an option because there are some locations where we've gone that route and said one sidewalk would be installed, the other would be installed as development occurs. So my understanding is that that is included in the estimate.
Then, okay. If that's really included, just go ahead and do it so we can save those children.
I've just been wondering, is there something particularly unique about this intersection that prompted discussion to have the underpass? I mean, we have a number of school crossings that could also have something like that, but this one seems unique. We don't have it anywhere else at a school crossing.
I think there's a number of things that kind of led to that. One, you have the school here, with a lot of traffic coming from, or foot traffic coming from the north and those neighborhoods, and that trail network going to the school on the south. You also have the trail network to the north, and then the future trail network that would continue to the south. So you kind of have those two factors, and then also just given, with the road being somewhat elevated from the surrounding area, it fits really well to have that underpass. A lot of times it's hard because you have to do so much excavation and grading and making it all work. That's kind of where your costs really start to escalate. So in this location, there's kind of those benefits, and then it also just fits pretty well given the topography.
Jason, and this has been in our capital improvement project now for budget for several years, hasn't it? When did it first go
has.
in? Okay. So councils have had several opportunity to review and assess this underpass.
Yep.
As far as I can tell, there's never been a time where we haven't voted to put it out, right?
I would,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
That doesn't sound quite right to me. I mean, I don't fully trust my memory on this, but I don't know that we've had an extensive discussion about whether or not there should be an underpass. Clearly, there has to be a safe crossing, but underpass?
I don't know if there's been extensive conversation on it, but it has been in the capital improvement program for a number of years. It's actually been awarded 2 rounds of federal funding. I think the first one must have been 15, probably is when that went through. So at least at that point, and I believe it might have been in the unfunded list before that, but I'm not positive on that.
For this underpass
For the project.
project? Yeah.
This is the first sort of discussion of the project in detail, to my knowledge. Is that correct?
That could be accurate.
What's next?
All right, we'll move on to Foster Road. There we go. So this project will be an extension of Foster Road, basically from where it terminates now on the west end there, basically from Dubuque Street up to Prairie du Chien. With this project, it's a little unique in that it's city-owned property. That was done back when we had done the transmission water main a number of years ago. So the property was purchased, it's city property, but it's not yet right away. So now we're going through and we'll install rest of the utilities as well as the street pavement and sidewalks and that kind of stuff. One thing I do want to note too is this one is a little different than the other two in that this is being done as part of a subdivision. So it's kind of a partnership with some development that's occurring along Foster Road. And so it will be the developer that would actually do the construction here. They're doing the design. Obviously, the city and engineering staff are involved with the review of that, but it's actually the developer and their design team that are doing the work. So here you have Foster Road looking from the west end. Again, this is where it currently terminates or turns to chip seal for those homes there, but basically the end of the paving. And with Foster Road, the area that's in the picture here, so the area east of Dubuque Street, the existing pavement width is 36 feet, which is what we're proposing to match. And then to the west of Dubuque Street for Foster Road, that pavement width is 31 foot. And again, that would be back-to-back for curb.
So why the difference?
I don't know what the design was here. I know just to the west of this picture, you're just coming out of the turn lanes that are at Dubuque Street. So I don't know if it was what the additional width was there. But it actually, I believe, might even widen a little bit as you develop those turn lanes. And then on the east end, this is just a picture of the existing corridor. So again, nothing really to see there other than this is the corridor that's kind of laid out for the project. And just for reference, Prairie du Chien has a 28-foot pavement width. So here's what is proposed on Foster Road. This is a 36-foot, basically back-to-back pavement section. Again, 11-foot travel lanes. We've included 5-foot bike lanes, so that'd be 5 foot of actual travel lane for the bikes. And then a 1.5-foot painted buffer. So it would be a buffered bike lane on Foster Road. Again, it includes 8-foot sidewalk on the north side and 5-foot sidewalk on the south side. It is proposed that these would be constructed on both sides with the project. And then this one is a 66-foot right-of-way, so it's a pretty tight right-of-way for that collector arterial classification. Here's just from the bicycle master plan, again, kind of talking about what is recommended for Foster Road. Again, you can see a blue line and a green line. So again, this is bike lanes and side paths. And so that's what is recommended for Foster Road to be included with the project. So here we have, again, estimated project costs and schedule for the project. The estimated construction costs are just over $2.6 million. And then you can see total project cost is about $3.2 million. Schedule, looking at doing the design here in January through April this year with construction. They're wanting to do construction starting later this year and then likely continuing into next year. I do have a note here. Again, this is being completed as part of the Forest Hill Estates subdivision. And as part of that, there will be a development agreement that will be coming before you that would be impacting this project or involving this project.
Jason, I noticed that the schedule says design development January 2018 through April 2018. This raises questions about the viability, well, not viability, but what would happen if we said we want 25-mile-an-hour design speed on Foster Road?
I would say that this one certainly is the furthest along, so that I think as far as what the impacts would be, we'd have to look at that. Again, I think it's just going to depend on what that change means. If you're looking at simply reducing the lane width and widening the bike lane, that's going to have very little impact because it'll be just striping. If we end up looking at what it would take to change the pavement width, that may be a little bit more. That would probably still be doable. And then, as far as the alignment and that kind of stuff, we're kind of locked in there, again, with it already being city property. So I don't think that we're going to be looking at huge changes. Obviously, again, they're fairly far along in the design, but if that's the direction, then that's what we would work towards.
Okay. Any questions for Jason about Foster Road? There aren't any school crossings to worry about here.
So was this plan to extend Foster Road in the works? It sounds like it's been being planned for a while, before even the Forest Hill subdivision plans came before us.
Yeah, my understanding is this one's been in the works, or been planned or considered for a long time. I think really it's been something that's been viewed as kind of development-driven. So once there was somebody that was ready to pull the trigger on development, then this would be.
It was ready to go.
Would go
Okay.
along with that.
Yeah, just as a location for
Yep.
a road, and
Yep.
so we own the property. That's been known for a long time, yeah, but not the design of the roadway.
Okay.
Yes.
On to the last one? All right. McAllister Boulevard extension. And so what we're looking at here is really the extension of McAllister Boulevard from just east of Covered Wagon Drive over to Sycamore Street, and it'll tie into what is essentially the north roundabout that was installed as part of the Sycamore Street project a couple of years ago. This alignment, we did a corridor study back in 2007, so this is another one that's kind of been out there for a while. We knew it was coming at some point. That point is now, apparently, so we'll be moving forward with that design. One thing I just wanted to bring up and keep in mind as we move through this process is currently the property is outside the city limits. So annexation and the acquisition of right-of-way is just something we'll have to kind of work through as we work through the project. So these aren't currently in the city limits. Here again, just a view of McAllister Boulevard. So looking at the west end, this is where it currently dead ends. This is a 34-foot pavement width. And then just looking at Sycamore Street, so kind of on the east end, this is looking west towards where the project would tie into. There's the pavement width on Sycamore Street is 34 feet as well. That does include bike lanes, so that one was 11-foot travel lanes and 5.5-foot bike lanes on Sycamore Street. So for McAllister Boulevard, for this stretch of it, the bicycle master plan includes protected bike lanes or cycle tracks and side paths. So that's what it recommends for this stretch. I think what we are planning to do for this project as kind of as part of the overall project design is look at McAllister Boulevard, not only this stretch, but also maybe the stretch to the west, and look at how do we kind of tie that all together, and not have something where to the west you have no on-street bicycle facilities, here you have protected bike lanes, or whatever we end up going with. Just kind of taking a more global view of that corridor and seeing if there's a way we can kind of tie that together, especially with the Mormon Trek project, the 4-lane to 3-lane conversion there, and the additional bike lanes for at least the portion even further to the west. So kind of looking at that corridor as a whole and what that solution might look like to keep some consistency for bicyclists.
Jason, you may have discussed this earlier, but how wide are the bike paths on First Avenue now, just for point of reference?
I don't know offhand. I want to say they're probably in that 5.5-foot.
Okay.
So it's
Just
probably
by
in
way
that-
of illustration or comparison?
Yeah, I would say typically in that 5 to 6 range.
We might anticipate, though, more bicycle traffic along here. It seems as though like Terry Trueblood is utilized a lot with their path for bikers.
Yep. And I think we anticipate, I think I have it here in a little bit, but I think we would anticipate something similar where we would also have a wide sidewalk on one side as well as on-street bicycle facilities. So there would be options for bicyclists there. So looking at this project, one thing that has obviously come up somewhat recently is the Opticos report. And related to this, we are looking to finalize the design contract for this project as well. So we actually don't have anybody under contract to do this design. So we're just about to start that. I think it'll probably be at your next meeting. You'll likely see a contract for design of this. And when we were selecting consultants for this, we actually included and made it noted that there was the potential for the South District Plan or some of those planning pieces to be implemented in this project. So they're aware of that. They're aware of they'll need to consider that as they move through the design. But I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the things from the Opticos report, obviously talking about connectivity in the South District area. all travel modes, so that's, pedestrians, bicyclists, as well as vehicles. There was a few mentions of bus service challenges, so that, again, gets to that transit and a need for transit in this area. Bike infrastructure, interconnectivity, again, kind of looking at the area as a whole and how do we connect those pieces versus just having one piece that has that bike facility on it. Talking about relief for neighborhood streets, so again, the Langenberg example, those kind of things where we have a lot of traffic and concerns from residents, and then improved walkability. So, like I mentioned, we don't currently have anything as far as design for this. We have the alignment from the previous study, but we really don't have anything as far as a preliminary design or anything along of that type. And so what we are looking at the project could include is obviously an urban cross-section. I think that's pretty much a given, which would include curb and gutter, 11-foot travel lanes, again, on-street bicycle facilities. The bike master plan is recommended protected or a cycle track. We'll certainly consider that. I think the one question that I may have with that would just be, as we look at the corridor, does it make sense to have this piece be protected and maybe others aren't? Do we want that consistency, or do we want to go with the protected? So that's yet to be decided. Certainly haven't made any decisions there, and it's something we'll look at. Again, I think we would likely look at an 8-foot sidewalk on the north side and then a 5-foot sidewalk on the south side, again, consistent with what other locations, and then likely a 100-foot proposed right-of-way. So again, just kind of the estimated project cost and schedule for this project. The project costs are estimated at about $3.6 million. Total project in the neighborhood of about $5.2 million. And then as far as schedule goes, looking at starting design development here, hopefully in the next month or so, and then with the goal of having construction next year. And I think that is it for what I have.
Jason, I have a question on the wide sidewalks. For the quote-unquote wide sidewalk, can bikes go on the wide sidewalk? I know certainly with the narrow ones they're prohibited, but for the wider ones, can they use those?
They are allowed to use those, correct.
Okay, and what is the definition of a wide sidewalk? Width-wise, is that 8 feet?
Typically, it's 8 feet.
Okay.
Bicyclists can go on the narrow sidewalks
They can.
anywhere, can't they?
Yep.
As long as it's not downtown.
Just the downtown area.
The downtown, okay, because I know that some people have gotten some tickets. Okay.
So McAllister raises some really interesting challenges. When the Blue Zones project was done, Dan Burden, who's one of the key proponents of and spokespersons for the Blue Zone, said something like, what was the language? Hold on, bear with me for a second. Got to find the language. Build places through transportation, not transportation through places. So the thing that concerns me most, by far, with regard to the roadway design discussion, is the relationship between the design of McAllister Boulevard and the design of the area around Alexander Elementary. I think if we have a wide, a wide roadway that's similar or equivalent to what exists west of Sand Road, and have it go over to Sycamore and then go through the roundabout and then on up north, then we have completely undermined the viability of Opticos's form-based code work for that neighborhood. It seems to me we need to come up with a roadway design that will, by itself, enable Opticos and its work to be done well. So I think that's a real important challenge for us.
And that's something we recognize, and that was part of the reason we included that in the scope of what likely will be the consultant working on the project, is to have that coordination, at least reach out and get some guidance on what they see that being. Because obviously we aren't wanting to design a roadway, construct a roadway, only to find out from day one that it goes against other planning efforts. So we recognize that, and that's certainly something that we're attempting to do and to help coordinate that. Like I said, we actually have no design started on this project. We have some possible parameters here, but nothing that we've designed around.
Okay, any other questions for Jason about, at the moment, about McAllister?
Before we have general discussion.
Yeah. All right, so great presentation, Jason. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Why don't you hang around? I think
Yeah,
we'll
I'll-
end up
I'll stick
asking you
around.
other
Yeah.
questions, you know. So we need to provide guidance, given the information we have and given what our values are and ambitions are. So I'd invite all of you to speak out. It's a really important discussion for us. I think it really gets to the heart of the interaction between neighborhood design and roadway design. And I imagine that we'll have varying perspectives about this and about what we prefer to do. So let's get those differences out there, see if we can engage them, and hopefully, at a minimum, get at least 5 council people to say, yes, this is what we want to do. And ideally, all 7 of us to agree about that. But I'd like to have some substantial support for whatever it is we end up recommending or providing guidance about. Okay, so who wants to speak first?
I'll start, since I know I'm in the minority. So the questions I have, and I guess questions/statements around this discussion is, I'm a different type of driver, and I guess I talk with different type of drivers. I think, in general, I don't spend a lot of time in the car talking or listening to music. I plan on getting where I'm going. And I think that was a statement that one of our street design people brought up to me last time that I made in a prior meeting, that is my goal. And so I pay attention to the roadway, and I'm there quickly. I understand the conversation that we're trying to have around safety. I do think it's absent of a conversation around education, that, there's this expectation that people will just be willy-nilly and walking into the roadway and not paying attention to where they're going. And that somewhat is problematic to me, but that's neither here nor there, because again, that's been absent of any of our deliberations so far. But as far as safety is concerned, if we're truly thinking about what's research show us, and spend some time looking at kind of the research-based practices around it, we throw out 25. I mean, ultimately, if we're saying to staff that we want to slow down traffic enough to prevent a death or prevent serious injury, we'd be talking about 20 miles an hour. At 25, there's a 50% survival rate, or 30, there's a 50% survival rate. At 20, it's 90%. And so if hit by a car, let me be clear about that, or if a car was hit, cyclist hit by a car. And so I guess, I don't necessarily know if I agree with that point, but I at least want us to be about what we say we're going to be about. I mean, if we're going to be about safety, then I don't necessarily know that 25 is going to cut it from some of the conversation that we're having. I mean, if ultimately we're talking about slowing down traffic in order to be safe, then I would say 20. And that just goes to empirical research and some other perspectives from Strongtown and some other articles I was reading to that end. And so that's my general feeling in regards to, I would say, just overall speed limit. I would also say some of the research shows that, and I think you talked about this as well, John, having a conversation about speed limits doesn't necessarily change the traffic or the amount of traffic on the roadway. And so I think some of the designs that the staff have brought to us as far as additional closing lanes, adding some bicycle structures, I'm in favor with. I mean, that I don't necessarily see an issue with. I do think it's tough, and so I have some questions from a bus standpoint, because I know that everybody wants to close the width of the lanes, but I remember driving a bus, and the level of the error that you can have in driving in a smaller lane is tougher in a smaller lane compared to a larger lane. So I think that has to be a part of our conversation, unless we're not talking about busing and we're just talking about pedestrian and vehicles. So that's where I'm at. I think in general, from what I've seen overall, with the roadway design, I'm supportive. I am supportive of kind of the steps that are taken forward from a bike master plan and incorporation from that standpoint as well. But I think my biggest kind of rub, so to speak, is this conversation around, lowering the speed limits. I think ultimately, if we are going to lower the speed limits, which I'm not not saying I'm not for, but not for. I think we need to really focus on, then what would be that ultimate safety element that we'd be looking at, or ultimate speed limit we would be looking at?
Let me make sure I'm clear. At this point, not hearing yet from other people, you favor what the staff has presented us with?
Correct.
In terms of the speed limit as well.
Yeah, and that was a really good way of just summarizing what I just said.
Yeah.
Trying to sound knowledgeable.
Kingsley and I think are pretty much on the same page. The comment I would have about the speed limits is I think we need to keep in mind what these streets are for. They are arterial streets. Now, having said that, I think we've got to look carefully in terms of the school. We've got to look carefully in terms of how does that impact the development down around Alexander and not having this just area divided by a street that is hard to get across. So certainly that has to be paid attention to in terms of the design. But I think if you take a look at Langenberg and the issues we're having there, if people can't move any better on McAllister than they can on Langenberg, this isn't going to alleviate any of the problems on Langenberg, because people are still going to take the path of least resistance if their goal is to get from point A to point B. And so I think what's really crucial as we look at this is the fact that these are designed and they are meant to function as arterial streets. So while Kingsley, I think on the one hand, you were kind of joking about, going all the way down to 20 miles an hour if we're really talking about safety, at least I hope you were. I mean, we're not going to get people driving 20 miles an hour on these. And if these are 20, everybody's going to be going on the side streets and going faster. So I think with appropriate design, I think, other than I think everybody's concerns about the new Hoover, I'm in favor of the 35, for these to function effectively as arterials, but I think we've got to have the design for people, obviously, to get across. I think when I was looking at some of the NACTO stuff, and they talk about an absolute minimum on two-lane streets of 20 feet. And Kingsley, you talked about the buses, and Jason included that in here. So I'm comfortable, and I think it's reasonable for us to go to the 11 feet to give a little bit more space, and also anywhere you've got the curves, and I would say particularly on Foster, that's going to be somewhat winding and also hilly, to give people, a little bit more leeway in terms of potentially getting out of their lane. I like the idea of the protected bike lanes on Foster for that same reason. A little bit more room there and a little bit more safety. But no, overall, I would say I'm supportive of what the staff has presented to us.
Well, my thoughts on this, I think they do begin with the speeds, because that kind of sets the tone, and then questions regarding the actual dimensional requirements, I think, flow from what we want the speed to be. I understand the desire for these streets to function as thoroughfares for through traffic, and what that suggests in terms of a traffic speed. At the same time, they are running through what we would like to be viewed, picking up on Jim's comment, as neighborhoods. And at 35, which we typically have a 5 mile per hour grace over whatever we post the speed limit to be, that puts us at 40 miles per hour. We've seen the charts on what happens at 40. It's something like 9 and 10. There should be a collision. You can expect most likely a fatality. So what could happen at 35 to 40 is that these streets end up being barriers between development within the overall neighborhood or district. It's difficult to cross these streets safely should the speeds be 35 to 40. And then furthermore, we're adding to that equation integrating a bicycle infrastructure, which in all three of these instances are not protected lanes. They are simply adjacent to the travel lanes for the motor vehicles. Foster has a fairly narrow buffer, but the other two are simply adjacent to the travel lanes. So we're introducing onto the roadway, a fairly vulnerable user of that roadway, and not really giving them much float in terms of their relationship to vehicles, which, if we're saying 35 to 40, are moving at a speed where I suspect if we looked at that aspect of how we should be designing our bicycle network, it would require that those lanes be protected, not simply buffered, but actually protected by an element such as plastic markers or whatever we typically see. So we're talking about, in my view, if we were to go to 35 as a speed limit, then the concept or design of the bicycle network would have to reflect that speed. And there would have to be more separation, because if you don't have that separation and you have a collision with an automobile, it could be over for you. And I really do not. I mean, we're trying to promote multimodal use of our right-of-ways. If we're inviting injury and serious injury and fatality, that's not how I'm envisioning how we're moving forward. So my feeling is 25 is what we want. I understand that in a way is an educational issue as well as just setting a speed limit. I think we really need to be clear, if we agree that slower speeds are desirable, that needs to be communicated to the public in terms of why that's important. So if we were to go to 25, then that gets back to what should the lane widths be. And I know I've referenced this before in one of our work sessions. In the Des Moines MPO report, Mobilizing Tomorrow, where they talked about recommended roadway design standards, it states that the ideal travel lane for most urban streets with speeds below 35 miles per hour is 10 feet. So that's, again, it's sort of tying what do we want the speed to be in the motor vehicles that are running adjacent to the bike lanes, and sizing the lanes to fit what we want the speeds to be in both the traffic lanes and in the bike lane itself. So I'm generally supportive of 10-foot lanes. I mean, I know we've seen the diagrams on the bus sizes and the truck sizes, but they are not the typical. We're not talking about a lot of truck traffic or bus traffic on these streets. The majority of the vehicles are going to be, more conventional size, and so my feeling would be where I land on this is 25 mile per hour speeds. It does seem to me there's a lot of support, especially if we're integrating bicycle infrastructure into the roadway for 10-foot lanes. And then we could adjust the bike lane with that to be a little bit wider so there's more separation. 6 feet, I think, is the minimum that's recommended for our bike lanes. We have more than that on Foster, so it'd be a minor change to the McAllister and American Legion.
So you're recommending 6-foot bike lanes?
Minimum 6 foot.
But I just want to ask you, saying that if we want 25 speed limit, the requirement for street have to be 10 foot? That's what you're saying, or?
I'm saying that part of the reason, if I would say if we want 35 mile per hour, 35 to 45 mile per hour speeds, 11 feet makes sense. Which I'm not supportive of, because I feel that
Yeah,
streets of that with that speed end up.
No, I just want to ask, is the 25 required 10, or it still can be on the 11?
10 feet would be more aligned and support the idea of a 25 mile per hour speed.
Okay.
If you increase the lane width, and there are other. Here's another quote from NACTA. Lane widths of 10 feet are appropriate in urban areas and have a positive impact on street safety without impacting traffic operations. So the thought is if you increase the width, then that tends to increase traffic speed.
Okay.
And with each foot, there's the increment of additional speed goes up.
Sure.
Rockne?
Yeah, so
Owen?
basically what I want to do is append everything I'm saying I want it to be subject to, of course, minimum accepted professional design standards, obviously. So I think that's sort of our foundational level. We articulate the vision. We rely on the expertise of our staff to implement what the vision is. So with that proviso, to Susan and Kingsley's point, I would agree with you if the only thing we were designing was for car to pass along these roads. But I think what Jason had talked about was our Complete Streets policy talks about that we're designing for, quote, all current and projected users of the public right-of-way are intended to conveniently reach their destination via public rights-of-way, regardless of their chosen mode of transportation. And so to me, that means bicyclists and that means pedestrians. And if we're serious about having bicyclists have that access on an equal footing with the cars, I think we need to look at the 25 max and the 10 feet lane width. Again, subject to the minimum acceptable standards. I know Jason had talked about for arterials, NACDO may require the minimum of 11 foot. And I think if staff comes back to us and pushes back on that, I would certainly change that. Ultimately, what I'd like to have is hopefully at some point, since we're in the early design standards, we could communicate our preferences and hopefully would be able to have a follow-up discussion with that. So that is my preference. Now back to Kingsley's point, that is something that Jeff had brought up in terms of the fatalities, which if you're talking about having bikes and pedestrians operate on equal footing, the fatality rate does increase exponentially based upon speeds. I think at 20, there's essentially you're likely to have a 90% chance of survival. Mm-hmm. At 30, it's 50% chance of survival. And at 40, it's 10%. So these are very significant. I think Mazahir brings up a really good point in terms of the kids. In terms of that particular issue, in terms of the underpass, I guess what I would like to see on that is that's a really complicated issue in terms of what we want to do with that. At some point in the future, after consultation with our school district, assuming it's not too difficult for staff to do, I'd like to see whether it's possible, if feasible, to evaluate whether we could, in lieu of the underpass, do 2 crossings to ensure that the kids are safety or can safely pass, or add the sidewalk as Mazahir had talked about. But I wouldn't want to decide that today until we have the school district weigh in terms of their preferences on that. So that's sort of where I come down, at least at this point.
For me, I think I agree with 25 speed limit, definitely, since kids will be like going at least around like the American Legion Road. But really, I will, as the council, since this is really something being budgeted and already included and the money is there for this project, why not doing both sidewalk? But anything else, I agree. Like also, we can maybe make as John said, I agree with him completely about doing 10 feet and expanding a little bit the bike lane to 6. But really, I want to ask the council, since this is the money is there and it's being budgeted, why not doing both sides? What was the reason of waiting? I thought we are not like already budgeted, but if we done, why?
Somebody had mentioned that this is a very important discussion for us to have, and it is, because these are all 3 very important roadways that have needed to be done for a long time. But I think it's important that we get it right this time. We don't want to go back and say we coulda, shoulda, woulda. It's always bothered me that we as a city hire such groups as Opticos or bring speakers in such as Jeff Speck. And one of the things that stood out in my mind, and I remembered for some reason from Jeff Speck, was the 10-foot lane on the streets. And he again talked about that the wider the lanes, the increase of the speed. So I, like John, would be in favor of that. And then I think Jason mentioned that, do we want consistencies? And I think we should have seen consistencies in this as far as the bike lane. I don't see why we would need the different bike widths. Unlike John mentioned, instead of Foster Road, the 5-foot with 1.5-foot buffer, that'd be 6.5-foot buffer. We could have the 6.5-foot buffer if it's possible for all 3 of them. If not, the 6-foot would be good, because I keep thinking of First Avenue, and the question was asked how wide those bike lanes were, and it was kind of uncertain. It seems to me they're not very wide. I don't think they even seem like they're 5 foot. But at the time, we didn't have our bike master plan, so it probably wasn't even in the back of people's minds. But driving on First Avenue and having bikes along the road, which you see very few bikes along that road, and I think there's a reason why, because I think bicyclists don't feel safe riding there, because it is a very narrow lane, and especially if the cars are turning off of First Avenue onto the side streets, such as Wade Street or along there, heading over to Southeast Junior High, it's very dangerous for there to be such a narrow width for those bikes to be in. So I would be in favor of that, and like Mazza here, adding that south side sidewalk along by Hoover.
So let me ask all 6 of you whether, for those of, no, let me put it this way, for those of you who advocate 25 miles an hour as the design speed, do you think that should apply to all 3 roads, or perhaps just to 1 or just to 2 of the roads? Because that'd be important in terms of providing the staff with guidance.
I would like all 3.
Yeah, I think for the sake of consistency, and this is kind of, in my mind, a larger question, and that is, a coherent speed policy with respect to the city as a whole. And so, in my mind, the more we try to, nudge the speed limits down, the better, because drivers, having one speed in the neighborhoods and another on certain arterials and yet another, on, say, Riverside Drive can be somewhat confusing. It seems to me the goal should be to try to come up with a consistent policy of once you enter the city, with few exceptions, but particularly even on arterials, if they are driving through neighborhoods, should be held at a lower speed, because that just reinforces the notion that once you turn off that arterial, that you don't have to ratchet down so dramatically, once you leave it. And so I think there's a carryover effect. In other words, when you set a certain speed on an arterial and then expect the driver to make an adjustment once they move into the residential areas, or neighborhood proper. So, I do think the 25 makes sense as a general approach.
I'll just reiterate, I don't agree. I think arterials are designed to carry more traffic. They're designed more to get people from point A to point B. I think people are very used to, for decades, of the idea you turn off an interstate, you slow down. You turn off an arterial into a neighborhood, you slow down. I mean, I think people are very used to that. I think we're going to have a lot of difficulty with enforcement of 25 miles an hour. I think that in itself can be a safety issue, in that's how you have it posted, but that's not what people are driving at all, because they're not in the city. And that was the other thing when I was looking at the NACTO stuff that I had difficulty with, was a lot of the stuff talked about urban street design. To me, when you start looking at McAllister, you start looking at American Legion, to me, those aren't urban. I mean, they're coming into the city. To me, and it may just be my misunderstanding of how NACTOS means it, but to me, I would think of urban more in the city, like in the neighborhoods, in downtown Iowa City, or if you're in a huge city, in the middle of Los Angeles or whatever. But to me, these arterial streets coming in or moving you from one part of the city to another, like Foster, where you're not going to have a whole lot of curb cuts along Foster. Why are we putting that down to 25 miles an hour? I mean, people aren't going to drive it. I think you actually could potentially have a lot more safety problems when you post a speed limit that people are not realistically going to follow.
One quick rejoinder to that is that in the future, we are going to have residential subdivisions in proximity to those. So I would agree with you now. There's sort of empty spaces, but I think in the future, you're going to see a lot higher residential densities. So I think you bring up a good point, but that would be my response.
Well, and I think the other point that's related to that, Rockne, too, is, and this is important with McAllister, is how does that design fit in with the development of the neighborhood, and how and where do we allow curb cuts and crosswalks so that roads don't become a barrier to people getting to the other side or difficult to get on and off? But if you're careful about the design, it's just like with Taft, we've said very carefully, there's not going to be many curb cuts out onto Taft because eventually we want that to be paved and be truck traffic, get them off from Scott Boulevard, et cetera. So I think the same thing is important as we look at McAllister and these others. How and where do we put those curb cuts in terms of safety?
Yeah, I would agree as well. Just with the urban areas piece, I mean, I pulled up NACDOC just because I was remembering the same piece around urban areas and being somewhat confused about kind of the picture and the diagram that they were showing here and the arterial streets that we were talking about just now. And so I think greater articulation as far as what we define urban areas to be, I think would be important, assuming that we're moving forward in the current majority. I would also say I would agree about the arterial streets, and I was being sarcastic about my 20-mile-an-hour piece. You know, we're a growing community, and so I'm just not necessarily understanding. I get the approach of wanting to change to be multimodal, wanting to change to incorporate more pedestrian and bicycles. But, you know, I feel like, you know, I think I threw out maybe a year ago this conversation around shared streets and having opportunities to share the street with bicycles, not necessarily from a buffered bike lane standpoint, but having bicyclists on the road. And that's done in different countries. That's done in Seattle, Washington. That's done in different areas. But, I mean, obviously we're not moving forward in that sense right now, but I guess I'm not understanding it for the motorist. And again, I understand that we're focusing on all areas, but I feel like the motorist isn't a part of this general conversation because literally all areas, so residential dwellings, not necessarily conducive for motorists. I mean, and I get that it's more about residential and focusing on slow down speed limits. Now we're saying arterials are going to be more about how we slow down speed limits for more walking and bicycling. And so, you know, my issue from a motorist standpoint is like, where is the ability to get across town with any type of speed? I mean, somebody made the joke or comment not too long ago. You know, we used to be a 10-minute town. Now we're talking about being a 15-minute town. Now I feel like we're trying to be a 25-minute town. And I don't necessarily know if that's conducive to the growth that we're talking about coming into our community. The last piece I would say here is around bike lanes. And so I would say in general, if we're talking about sharing the street from a bike lane standpoint, I remember, you know, just campaigning not too long ago, people weren't even interested in, I appreciate you bringing up First Avenue, because what is First Avenue? Is that 35? 25.
The speed limit?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 25 because I drive it all. I just wanted to make sure because I was confirming. It's 25. Nobody rides their bicycle down there. The issue for me is people wanted to see more buffered bike lanes. And so I don't necessarily know that we're even at the slower speed limits, which is, again, using the Southeast First Avenue or a roadway as an example. We haven't seen proliferation of more bicyclists using that area. If anything, it's been non-existent, at least as much as I drive it. So I guess I'm feeling like, you know, I understand our agenda or our desire to do some things around this conversation to make roadways more safe. But again, I'm just missing the piece where why arterial streets? I mean, before you know it, you're going to tell me that Mormon Trek is going to be down in 25. And maybe you are telling me that. I don't know, but I think that's the arterial conversation that I think is drastically separate than the residential conversation. I feel like we're trying to, you know, put the two together.
I'd like to note that there are lots of arterials in Iowa City that have speed limits of 35 miles an hour, and they have, the ones I'm thinking of have houses that face onto the roads. I'm thinking about Dodge Street, Governor Street, the first part of Mormon Trek, a large part of Benton Street. I'm probably missing some others.
I think Dodge and Governor 25, aren't they? Yeah.
Well, didn't I say that? That's what I meant to say.
Oh, you said 35.
I'm
You said
sorry,
35,
I meant to
yeah.
say 25. Yeah, thank you for catching that. So I definitely didn't mean 35.
I was like, great.
Yeah, and there's really another, this is, the way this really connects with the design of neighborhoods is that if you have arterials that cut through new developments with 35-mile-an-hour speeds, then people will do, just like Susan suggested, they will come off of, quote, collectors onto arterials, and then they'll drive as quickly as they can without getting a ticket. Some people do that, right? On the arterial. Or you can have multiple routes within neighborhoods so that people can have multiple routes of getting to where they want to go. And that calls for lower speeds, lower speed limits through design, not just by a sign, but through design for even these roads that are more thoroughfares rather than purely residential streets. So the best example of that I can think of is the North Side neighborhood, where you've got this grid of streets where people drive typically something like 20 to 25 miles an hour.
Yeah, but that's, to me, Jim, that's more when that's part of that neighborhood is either their destination or their starting point. It's not, if they're trying to get from point A to point B and it's not in that North Side neighborhood, they're not going through that grid of streets. And so when we look at McAllister, and the goal here is to have something around the south side of the city, I think you still have to have that arterial that can carry traffic at, say, 35 miles an hour. And like I said, I think we've got to look at how we really design those neighborhoods, both north and south of it. I think we've got to look very carefully how we do that. But I don't think that means you take McAllister down to 25 miles an hour and narrow it up so it's just one of the, quote, local streets. I don't think you're going to, I think you're going to end up with another Langenberg.
Well, I think people are, I guess I can even speak for a hypothetical person. They'll use Langenberg because it's a closer shot to get to where you're going to. I wouldn't, the hypothetical person wouldn't use 25 to go further down
South,
Sycamore and then come back up. You would just use the quickest route to get
Right.
there. So, I'm interested in, to that extent, if we move forward, I'll be interested in what the data shows because, I won't be doing it, but that hypothetical person, may be thinking about that. And I think that's what we need to talk about and think about because I would agree with Susan. Ultimately, we're talking about how we're moving traffic through and not necessarily impacting those, I would say thoroughfares, but I meant, those streets between that are more residential.
And I do think that this plan that the staff has brought us does address a lot more than just the motorist. I think the bike lanes, I think having an 8-foot sidewalk on one side of each of these streets so people who walk and or bicyclists who aren't comfortable on the roadway can get off from the roadway and ride on the wide paths. And we have a huge biking community here, and let me tell you, this is going to be as good and a whole lot better than a lot of what they get when they get outside of the city. A lot of these people, are riding all the time, and they're riding Sand Road down to Hills, and you've got just a paved shoulder. This is going to be a huge improvement, and I think it is I think it's well designed. I think it's well thought out with the national standards. I think it's going to do what we need for our motorists. I think it's going to be a huge improvement for bicyclists, and it's going to give walkers, joggers great opportunity with either the 5-foot or the 8-foot sidewalks.
You do bring up a good point, Susan, in the sense that 11 feet is a victory in the sense, as opposed to the 12. So I do want to commend staff for that. And again, I think if they come back to us at a subsequent work session and just say that what we want to do in terms of the 10 and 25 is inconsistent with, again, that minimally recognized professional standard, then I would defer to staff's expertise on that. But I would want to make sure that they come back with that report and explain why. So I want to keep an open mind, express our policy preference, while at the same time recognizing, staff's expertise in terms of NACDO as well as the other recognized design standards suit us.
So has anybody not commented yet about the 25 with regard to all 3 streets? I think I heard 1, 2. I support that idea. 3, so I see 5 people who prefer the 25 for all streets. I think your caveat's a good one, Rockne. Ron, Jason, we need some clarity, some feedback about that, if there are, if we're blundering in terms of what the appropriate standards are, I mean, however you phrased it, Rocky.
Well, I think Rocky makes a good point, and I'll just say it now, for this and the lane width, et cetera, is that, the immunity we get for liability is if the design is in accordance with generally recognized standards.
Yeah, and I understand there's
need to make sure
considerable
that's the
discretion in
case.
that, so we have to make sure we're within that window of,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and I think there is flexibility. This is what I'm seeing as I look at the standards, is that there is an acknowledged range, and that it's up to the decision-making process within any one community as to how we arrive with both, the technical perspective, the perspective of the user. We haven't talked about, again, the vulnerabilities of specific user groups. Children in particular have more limited ability to perceive speed and distance when encountering motor vehicles. And so, that's a perspective, I think, that sometimes doesn't get factored into, the decision-making process. That particular group isn't represented when we have these conversations. So I think in my mind, what I am seeing, because this is a very dynamic field, is the acknowledgement that flexibility is important in understanding, how to arrive at a design standard.
Okay, I want to draw our attention to three other decisions we should make here. One has to do with the underpass. Do we want the underpass or not? The second is the south sidewalk on American Legion Road that Mazahir referred to. And the third relates to ensuring adequate safety for especially school kids crossing at the roundabouts. So, so the underpass. Who's persuaded that the underpass is the best approach, given the topography, given safety for mainly kids and parents crossing American Legion Road and so on?
Yes.
Who prefers that?
I'm going to say that, in looking at the plan, because I had real concerns coming into this meeting with the underpass concept, I'm not seeing that, if I understand correctly, there's any significant cost associated with that because of the grades. So that's one thing. It's not something, because of the grades, that require a lot of retaining walls and so forth in order to get down to that level. I do still have concerns about the experience of the tunnel. I think that's an issue. But I'd say where I am now is that I don't know that I would say we should not move forward with the tunnel, but I have real concerns about the intersection at Barrington and American Legion in terms of a safe crossing there, because I'm not expecting everyone to use that tunnel. And so if we do have a significant number of people who are still going to be crossing at that intersection, I look at that intersection and, it's another Barrington in terms of the width of the street, at least on the west side, that pedestrians and bicyclists will have to cross. So I do think we're creating another Camp Cardinal situation that, I think needs to be looked at in terms of, we've created that crossing distance. Now, how can we make it a safe crossing, because it is adjacent to, an elementary school? So I'm kind of, in my mind, fine with the tunnel, but I see a real issue with the intersection. I think the south sidewalk makes sense. And then if we have the south sidewalk, the roundabout question isn't as critical.
Yeah, I personally think you make a very good point about the underpass. My guess is that parents would really prefer to be able to use an underpass rather than have their kids cross on the surface of the street. Though I know you and I talked about it a little bit beforehand, and I was leaning toward that approach. But I think the underpass makes sense, and you make a really good point with regard to the pedestrian crossing on the surface at Barrington. I wrote Burlington, at Barrington. So maybe we can be careful about the design for that pedestrian crossing. And I don't know, are the rest of you
Well,
okay with the
I'm still
underpass?
not really
Yeah, go ahead,
keen
sorry.
on the underpass idea
go ahead.
for a number of reasons. Aesthetically, for one reason, I don't think it looks all that great, and as well as historically in this town, tunnels/underpasses have been subject to graffiti, and I think that would not be a good thing for these students if they're going through that tunnel, and as well as safety, not the crossing the street safety, but the safety as far as, I don't even like to talk about that, but as far as predators, I mean, there are a number of children, particularly of the upper ages, 5th and 6th grade, so to speak, 10, 11, 12-year-olds that maybe have after-school activities, so they would be going through that tunnel at off-school kinds of hours that there wouldn't be a lot of adult supervision or other kids around. So I have concerns that way, but if I can be persuaded that it's safer as far as the crossing the street standard, I might be persuaded.
I'm not in love with the underpass, but I view this as sort of the flip side of that great discussion, that great mythical discussion we had with the school district on Horace Mann, where they reached out to us and we gave their input. I'm going to support the underpass, but I think especially along this area, I would really like, I mean, if the school district's interested, either through Steve or the school board, to get some of their feedback in terms of, I'm preliminary supportive of the sidewalk. I think that's important. But if it's possible, I would like to do that before we make any changes along those lines. I definitely don't think we should make any changes until we get some of their feedback. I think because we are at the beginning of the design process, hopefully we'd have enough time to do that. I know we have a lot of things on our work session agenda coming forward, but this is a big issue, and I want to make sure that we at least get either in memo form or anything else. But preliminarily, I'm supportive of the south sidewalk. Preliminarily, I'm supportive of the underpass. But it does seem like in terms of maybe another crosswalk going north, that would seem to be a good idea to at least explore to the extent that it's feasible by staff.
We're really running out of time here. But anybody else want to say anything about the underpass?
I'm not sold on the other underpass either, and it also from just a school management standpoint, I agree with Pauline's point. I wasn't joking about the creepiness of it, but ultimately, even if there is lighting, that's a long underpass. I mean, so it makes me think about what type of potential bullying harassment that could occur without adequate supervision. Not to say that wouldn't happen on the top end, but I just have some concerns. I mean, maybe I need to know a little bit more information as far as what the parents feel, and also what it would look like more clearly. So
Yeah, we definitely need feedback from the school district.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can arrange that.
Oz?
Yeah, I agree. We need feedback from the school district and from the parent because just like I get feeling if this like the light went off or anything, is there going to be a camera there or because it's really the width of the street and this is I don't know, a lot bad thing could happen there without like somebody else seeing or but. Of course, if the parent feel like this is really safe for their children, or if the school recommended, as long as we're going to provide the safety for it, lighting, and maybe some kind of security camera or anything, I don't know. But yeah, we need a feedback on this.
Jim, I am for the south sidewalk, though. Forgot to mention that.
We got about a minute to talk about the south sidewalk,
side.
or else we'll have to revisit it and the roundabouts afterwards. Anybody want to say anything about the south sidewalk? Kingsley, you're on board. Maj, you're on board.
Yeah.
I'm on board.
Paulina, we have 4 at least.
My only concern with doing it is, I understand that we've budgeted the money, but what's the opportunity cost in terms of not having developers pay anything? And then I'm also concerned about the idea that kids start using that and that becomes their habit, and then as development starts, it gets cut off and they can't use it potentially, and you've ingrained in them a habit. Whereas if you start by ingraining in them the habit of crossing at the roundabout, I agree with Jim, the concern about how do people get across safely at a roundabout. I totally agree with you there. So I'm concerned about the disruption potentially and what that means in terms of overall safety as well.
Ron? Yeah.
Ron Konecki, Public Works Director. The only thing I want to mention about the south sidewalk is that's outside of the city limits. So as far as maintaining the sidewalk and shoveling the sidewalk, we'll have to think through how we will do that because we won't have the ability to require that of that south property owner. So I think that would mean that we would have to figure out how we're going to do that. We have the same concern on the wide sidewalk on the north side. There's a piece that's outside of the city limits there also, but it's a much shorter piece. But in regards to the south side of the road, installing it, that's not that hard of a thing to do. It's just going to be the long-term maintenance, especially up into that south side is within the city limits, and there's development that's occurred there. So I just wanted to mention that before we get.
Okay, before you sit down, Ron, the last topic we wanted to touch on was ensuring safety at the roundabouts. If in fact that's what we do, and I think there's already the one on Sycamore, so we're only really talking about American Legion Road and Scott Boulevard. So what can we do to really ensure that it's safe for kids to cross there? I worry about that a lot.
When we had this discussion with the Sycamore Street construction, I think we're going to see if there's any feedback from the school district in regards to concerns that they had with their students crossing going to Alexander, and I haven't sought input from them, but we haven't had complaints either. But I'm not certain how many students are actually walking to that school and how many are actually bused there.
Yeah, and that will change, of course, once the area develops, right?
Yeah, and in regards to the roundabout at Scott Boulevard and American Legion Road, I think part of that was to try to maintain the truck traffic along Scott Boulevard. Obviously, with the stop sign there in the winter, when the hill gets slick, it just backs up traffic. But if the concern is that crossing is a concern, similar to what we looked at down on McAllister and South Gilbert Street, maybe we should be looking at what a signalized intersection would look like at that intersection versus introducing the roundabout there.
Ron, super quick, how feasible and how expensive is a traffic island? Is that something you really can't even opine on until you look at the intersection?
Well, with the roundabouts, there's already a traffic island built in as far as that crossing width. So the pedestrian crosses into the splitter island, and then they're crossing. All the traffic's coming from the left, right, until you get to the splitter island, and then it's coming from the right. So there is a kind of a pedestrian refuge island already built into the way the design of the roundabouts are built.
Okay.
Kent, you look like you're going to say something.
Yeah, Kent Ralston, train station planner. Yeah, Ron's exactly right. The other couple things I wanted you to think about too with respect to the roundabout are you've had a conversation about speed and the speed at which a pedestrian's hit and the fatality rate is on that bell curve. But you also want to think about the fact that when we do construct a roundabout, they actually twist that whole roundabout to slow traffic down purposefully. There's also advisory speed limits. The difference between that and, of course, the signal then is if somebody blows through a red light, you're hit at potentially full speed, where if you ever were potentially hit at a roundabout, the idea is that the speed is around 15 mile an hour. The other thing is with the crossing with school children is 2-lane roundabouts. Almost everybody agrees that they're not really that pedestrian friendly. So when there's actually 2 lanes in this case, the recommendation is for a single lane, and the jury's really out. You'll see studies say about half the time they say it's worse for pedestrians. The other half, a signal is better for pedestrians. But at the end of the day, I think the design would be good, and you've also got to think about the alternatives for a traffic signal, which are potential people blowing through red lights, noise, acceleration, braking, that sort of thing. Thank you.
Good, very helpful. I don't think we have time now to pursue that any further, but I hope we've provided you with the kind of guidance you need to proceed.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to thank Jason for making such an excellent presentation about the roads and where things stand and what the estimated costs are and for those roadways and everything else like that. And thank our council for having a pretty thorough discussion about this. Okay, so we're going to take a break there. Come back to, clarification of agenda items. Maybe we won't really do that because we will conduct the formal meeting. So we're going to adjourn now and come back to the formal meeting at 7 o'clock. Okay, can we return to our work session for today, April the 2nd, 2018? We're going to pick up with clarification of agenda items, not because we need clarification to make decisions, but maybe there was some point somebody wanted to make about any one of the items. So are there any particular items anybody wants to bring up?
Yeah, for me, I would like to talk about item. Let me see. It's item, I guess 4F7. A letter from Angie Jordan.
Yeah, the one about affordable housing on the southeast side. Yeah. What did you want to say, Maz?
I guess after I read this letter, I asked to see exactly why she's sending that letters, and I find out that there is something could come to us maybe next from the from one of the committee of the housing committee, and about the approving a program for the, I guess, southeast side, or is that the south side, like Taylor and Davis, southeast side, where I guess the city planning to buy houses there, and for neighborhood stability, where they buy a house and I guess maybe remodel it and sell it, again. I think this is really, to me at least, is not a good idea, because we are displacing the people who live there. Even though I know that the city, my understanding after I talked to Tracy Highshoes, she said that they're going to pay, if say the person there moved to another side of the city, but they was paying their $700 and they will pay their $800. The city is willing to kind of paying the difference for 4 years. But still, that area for renter-wise is affordable, one of the affordable area in Iowa City. If we are doing that, really we are displacing people, and we are reducing the rental affordable housing in Iowa City this way. And why should I just move because of 4 years of rent difference, and my kids will have new school, I have new neighbors, and I think rather than doing this, maybe we can discuss this later, but rather than doing this, if we have good option, buying it, selling to the same person who live there, because those people, as long as they're paying rent, that means they're paying the person mortgage, the person insurance, the person tax. That means they are eligible. Anyway, this is just something that I really want the council to pay attention to it before it come to us. So when it come, you have really good idea about what's going on.
Yeah, and it was mentioned by Angie Jordan in her letter or email to us, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, well, we'll have to address that when it comes to us.
Yes,
but
exactly.
Thank you for
I guess
bringing your thoughts to us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anything else? I'd say with regard to 4E4, I think Ashley and Simon, you're probably the people who could answer this, if anybody can. 4E4 is about the resolution about setting a public hearing concerning resurfacing Burlington Street. So I found myself wondering about resurfacing a Riverside Drive. I think that's something that's going to happen this year as well. Do you have any idea when that's going to come to us?
I don't know the timing of it.
Oh.
I don't know the timing of it, but that is this year as well.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's an item on the next, on April 17th.
Okey-doke.
At least that's what I saw today from Public Works.
At the North Riverside Drive you're referring to?
Well, no, Riverside, from highways,
From the highway all the way up into
from Highway
Coralville.
6 all the way up
Oh, okay.
through to the city limits, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's like the Governor Street thing. It's a big resurfacing project. One other thing, item 4D2, which is about Riverfront Crossings Phase 3. I'm just really glad to see this. I know that we had to pull, one shelter and restroom out
Yeah.
and then proceed with everything else, right? Yeah. So it goes. Anything else in terms of agenda items? All right, can we turn to the info packet discussion, the March 22nd packet? I'll plead guilty to item 2, IP2, the 2 articles about autonomous vehicles. I thought they were both pretty enlightening about what's involved and what cities can do through policy with regard to introducing autonomous vehicles into communities. I found them pretty stimulating to read, actually.
IP4, we'll have another meeting before then, so we'll have a chance to announce it again, but the Community Police Review Board Forum is on April 23rd. That's at the Iowa City Public Library.
Right.
IP3, I was really pleased to see the coming together of the advisory committee. I think we're going to get a lot of good, really targeted recommendations, and looking at the people that are involved in that, it's a good cross-section of people that really understand the issues and get things done. So I'm looking forward to see what the recommendations are.
Yeah, me too. Anything else on the March 22nd packet? How about March 29?
Ashley or Simon, I read part of IP7, the non-compliance letter. Do you have can you give us a brief synopsis of how severe that really is? Maybe we should have, or wait till Ron is here or whatever. It had to do with our stormwater, and as far as I got through, I didn't really see a whole lot, but I'll have to admit I didn't read the entire memo in great detail.
Well, the summary provided by Ben Clark, our engineer, gives a good, just a single-page summary of the steps we're taking to rectify the non-compliance issues. So one of them is the failure to specifically target new residents and businesses about what our stormwater programs. So we target all residents, but not specifically new residents. So we're making an effort to do that. So overall, it's just a program notification kind of issue. There have been there was a misinterpretation of permitting, and staff in the past has used discretion as far as illicit discharges and notifying the IDNR. So we're going to just notify them at all at this point. And then we have the weekly inspection reports. We're going to continue to monitor the inspection reports at time of quarterly inspections. And then the last thing was to submit a specific report by the end of April. So there was just a delay in the submittal of that report. And so there's a plan in place to get it in on time.
My apologies. I guess I flew through here so fast I missed his letter.
There was quite a bit of information.
I think I
for the
jumped to the
report.
next. I think I jumped to the next one and missed his letter. Sorry.
Yep. So it describes exactly what we're doing to identify the issues.
Thank you.
I agree, Susan, though it sounded a little bit not good.
Well,
at
anytime you
first.
get a non-compliance letter from a state agency, you just kind of want to know what's going on. And like I say, theirs was so long, I gave up reading it all in detail, and then I happened to skip by his nice detailed letter.
Sure.
and pictures.
They weren't proposing to assess any penalties or
Right.
anything like that, so I thought that was a positive.
Yeah.
Oh, and I was interested in that too. As many of you know, I've had sort of an interest in this issue of stormwater, the issue of piping it away or on site. But I think it seems like primarily their review was just the reporting issues, and it wasn't really the policy itself.
Right.
They didn't have any concerns with that, which I was pleased with.
Yeah.
I'd like to say a couple things about IP number 4, which is pending work session topics. On strategic plan actions, item number 5, which concerns the $15 an hour minimum wage. I noticed that the county supervisors decided to increase the minimum wage for all of its employees in a stepwise fashion toward $15. And we need to obtain information about that. It seems to me, you're probably already doing it, but we need to know what they did.
Sure.
And what they thought about when they were doing it, too. One other thing has to do with a topic that was on one of our lists last meeting, and I don't remember what we decided to do with it, but the topic was update on progress from the November work session regarding the Lusk Avenue building. Did we completely delete that topic, or is it being handled in a different kind of way? I do not remember. I thought it was going to continue to be on our work session agenda, but I don't claim to know for sure.
I'd have to refer to my notes from last meeting. I may be able to get you okay, so that was included within the requests of staff items, and it was just looking for an update on the progress. So I believe we determined that we'll continue to get that update to you. Haven't we been working with staff to identify exactly the issues that were in review?
Yes, we met, we talked at the development code meeting last week. We talked about the status of the various items, and I know there's a report coming to you. I can't remember what the decision was on the work session itself, but.
Right. We may be starting with a report, and based on the topics that are explored as far as our opportunities to make changes or not, those may individually come to you as a particular item or as a work session topic. But I think initially we're planning to do some type of just general informational notice to what the issues are or remain.
Yeah, there were some issues that can be pretty easy, like the representation issue. I mean, I'm done with that, and there's the BOA alternate issue. The biggest issues are the zoning code changes, and I think NDS staff is researching those still, and then I think we're going to talk about what recommendations to make. Or those I can see those being the ones that would come to you for more discussion.
Yeah, good. I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of it.
No.
Yeah, okay. Good deal. Thanks.
I'm wondering, normally we don't have, for work sessions, members of the public participate in the work sessions. Sometimes we have, though, haven't we?
can,
Okay.
yeah.
Only if we've asked somebody to come and give a particular presentation, usually.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, as long as they weren't sort of focusing on the past and wanted to constructively work with us for future recommendations, that might be something we'd want to explore. Because I think that they could at least give us that feedback in terms of what direction we want to go or not.
You're talking about members of that neighborhood?
Yeah.
I would be-
Is that not possible? I mean, if
I would be
clear
really-
with them that they can't go back in time and they can
I
move forward.
would be incredibly cautious on that, because to me, I've met with them, I think Jim has met with them, and to me, every communication we've had since then is still going back. It's still going back and saying what they feel was done wrong. I think we have all that information. I think we need to move forward with all that information. I don't have confidence that we could have a constructive conversation without it going back again.
Yeah, and-
I really don't.
And as you all know, I have shared email or letter, I can't remember which it was, to Karen Southard, who's the president of the Neighborhood Association, indicating that we're not going to relitigate past court decisions, and yet committing ourselves to
Future.
And I say that, Rockne, with the deepest sense of
Yeah. It's a tough case.
empathy for them for what has happened in their neighborhood. Because I wouldn't want that particular type of structure being built next to me. But I don't believe that that would be the most productive way for us to move forward. I think we have all the information and understanding.
Is staff, so you're working on a memo to council? Is that what I was hearing regarding Lusk?
We have been discussing what the parameters of a report to council on it.
So we don't really have a timeline on that, when we might see that, or a sense of when we might see that?
I don't know what decision has been made by Jeff on that.
Not yet.
Because I am concerned that it seems like a fair amount of time has elapsed. And yes, the correspondence we're hearing is backward-looking, but I am concerned about their vulnerabilities looking forward. So, you know.
I think the commitment made by ND staff at the last development code we have a development meeting every week, was to report to the group in a couple weeks. And then the group would make a decision about where to go. I mean, part of this is based on the fact that NDS is swamped.
The good news is we've hired 2 new people. That's the good news.
I mean, right, that's great, but, I mean, we went through the whole.
It will take them time to get up to speed,
So
too.
it just hasn't, unfortunately, it's the time commitment.
Okay, so we all are on the same wavelength there.
Yeah.
I think we can turn to council updates.
Jim, with
Yeah.
the upcoming joint
Sorry.
meeting, they're asking for agenda items. I just got an email today. Is that something that
Well,
you
that's
and
pretty
Jeff?
nervy of them.
Is that something you and Jeff normally
Did I?
toss around?
Agenda items.
We normally do it here, Kelly.
Oh,
Kelly didn't.
oh, Kelly did. Oh.
Yeah, okay.
Well, let's brainstorm items here. I-380 widening.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
We need to have a conversation with other entities, for sure, so that we can explore things and maybe come to some kind of mutually agreeable course of action. But maybe I think the joint entities might be a good place to do part of that. Looking pretty concerned.
Oh, I-380, I just didn't.
Oh,
hear the
sorry.
topic.
I was speaking too softly, my
I was
bad.
missing a topic, I-380.
Okay, so I-380 widening. What else?
I don't know, really. Just, is there any other question before I can suggest? Is there any way, this is a meeting with the Board of Supervisors, right?
No, it's with the Board of Supervisors, with Coralville, North Liberty,
Okay.
School Board.
But do we have like a Board of Supervisor meeting, joint meeting by themselves, or we don't have something like that?
In September.
It's proposed, yeah.
We're going to have one in September,
By, like city and?
just with the.
Yeah.
Just that, okay.
We did one a year ago,
Okay then.
roughly.
I'll wait.
Do you think they'd want to know anything about PedMall, update on the PedMall? Or, I mean, we're too far away from it just yet for it to start? Okay. Okay.
I mean, it's usually issues that impact across boundaries.
Super touchy topic, but do we want to bring up this question of who's going to be in on our jail alternative center? Is that too sensitive? There are
Sensitive.
certain groups that are not participating. Are we going to have a game plan for that in terms of getting people in?
There's an effort going on, yes.
Okay,
I
so we'll
do
allow
not
those
think that-
behind the
Yeah, I
scenes.
don't think that's the place, but thanks for asking about it, yeah.
How about the status of the Gateway project? More concrete's being poured, but
You know, that might not be a bad idea, Jim, because if I'm recollecting Simon and Ashley, help me, aren't we talking about a 60-day closure of the Park Road and Dubuque Street intersection?
Coming up.
Yes.
I think the more times we can get that out publicly and prepare people, that's right in the middle of fall semester and football season, and First Avenue is it First Avenue, whatever, in Coralville is going to be still under construction. It's going to be a mess this fall, getting
Well,
into Iowa
there's this
City from the north.
resurfacing, too.
And the resurfacing, depending upon when that's going on. So
Right.
I think that could be a good idea, is just kind of an update on the Gateway project.
Like an update of construction projects, road projects that would concern.
Riverside Drive,
all
maybe
the
then, too?
Well, yeah, I think,
Connections to communities.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We can at least give them an update on ours, and how are you going to get in and out of Iowa City this fall?
Yeah, that'd be a
Coralville.
very fruitful topic, seems to me.
Yeah.
Anything else? Well, if something else comes to mind, please let me and Jeff and Kelly know soon. All right, can we move to council updates? Let's start with Kingsley. Where's Kingsley? Let's start with Pauline and move to the left.
I just had another ECICOG, East Central Iowa Council of Governments meeting, and I have to say, it's not a committee that people fight over being appointed to, but I would encourage it because it's economic development on a larger scale than Iowa City, and I found it very interesting. And it actually is an entity that plans with a regional perspective and represents 8 counties: Lynn, Cedar, Iowa, Johnson, Jones, Lynn, Tama, and Washington. And so it's also a great opportunity to meet representatives from those counties, both on a supervisor level, and city governments are appointed, as well as some city representatives. There was a city representative from Johnson County, but I don't remember his name, and I didn't recognize him. But they also take citizen input, which is good. Meets on a monthly basis. Disadvantages that it does meet in Cedar Rapids and occasionally at some of the other locations, some of the other counties. So it does involve some travel time, but I really enjoy it and learn a lot about the big picture of all the counties and how we're working together on similar projects.
So speaking of ECI COG, they're involved in this express bus
Yes.
service and the carpool vanpool service. Can you tell us any more about that, about what they are doing?
Providing some financial support, I believe, on the ECICOG standpoint, because that's another thing. They actually have a board of directors and a building, a very lovely building in Cedar Rapids, an old refurbished manufacturing building. And so that board of directors has a pot of money. I believe each city or county pays a fee.
Yeah.
We pay a fee to them, and these fees all get into a big pot, and so then they offer some financial assistance. So they are looking at helping to provide financial assistance for that as far as vehicles, which is going to be the costly part of it, and planning the route. Is that
Yeah.
what you were wondering about? Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's still, it's on the.
I knew they were playing a role, but I
It
didn't know
is.
the
Yep.
details.
Mhm.
Okay, anything else? Susan?
Nope. Kind of gave mine before.
Well, we had all of us other than you had the MPO-JC meeting last week, and the majority voted to opt out of the swap for the federal aid. So it was a fairly lengthy and unusual meeting, I would say, for an MPO meeting. But all of us voted to opt out. I think there were only four representatives who supported the swap.
12 to 4, the vote, yeah.
So it was an interesting
Yeah, that's unusual that there's
conversation.
a vote and, that it's not unanimous.
which went against the Technical Advisory Committee, and so, yeah, it was sort of unusual, I would say.
Yeah, okay,
Certainly lively.
yeah. Anything else, John? No.
Well, maybe we could elaborate just a little bit on that, that one of the practical impacts of that is that for these federally funded road projects, we will maintain Davis-Bacon wages, which are essentially a federal minimum wage for transportation entities that accept a portion of federal funds, is my understanding. So it's a really big impact, I think, on local workers and also in terms of, the oversight on these projects. So it was a very lively discussion, and candidly, I'd like to see more of those on MPJFC.
Yeah, I guess echo to both of them. Yeah, it was a great meeting, and a lot of people participated and came and talk about what it is. And I guess it was good to see that all the Iowa City Council members are on the same page. Well, yeah, which is great.
Anything else, Maz?
No.
All right, I'll mention just one thing. I met with the Convention and Visitors Bureau Board on the 22nd. Our discussion focused mainly on upcoming events like the United World Wrestling World Cup, RAGBRAI, the UCI Cyclocross World Cup, which will be coming up later in the year. Also about construction of the new arena in Coralville, and about CVB staff ideas about how to implement their own strategic plan. So that focused, if I remember rightly, on 4 main topics. One is what they're calling Embrace the River, which is very similar to what we've talked about a bit concerning the Iowa River in Iowa City. So I made sure they had a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that staff and I put together. Also, the other topics were building a stronger connection with diverse communities. It's interesting to know that the CV board wants to do that. It's a good thing. Improving interconnection among bicycle trails, and focusing on transportation in the corridor, meaning the interstate and basically the light rail line or whatever would go in that particular right-of-way. So I mentioned the letter in that meeting. I mentioned the letter that you instructed me to write concerning I-380, and we had a brief discussion about it. But I didn't want to be in that meeting and then have them learn later on that I was supposed to write a letter and for them to feel that they had not been told. So took advantage of that opportunity. Okay, that's it for me. I think that's it for us.
Yes.
Okay, without objection, we're done with our work session for tonight.